Hi, I'm Dr. Deanna, and if you don't know who I am or you haven't been a part of my channel before, I am a homeschool mom that once upon a time was a classroom teacher, K through 3. I received my doctorate in curriculum and instruction and focused on really understanding how to meet the needs of children who are gifted, overlapping with learning disabilities. And so that is my background. But ultimately, I became a full-time homeschool mom, which is definitely an episode all in itself. But this is my office. This is my space. Welcome to where I design my episodes. You see where I have morning meeting with my high school homeschooler. And there's even a little play space back there set up for Bella Bun when she's not free roaming. That's my house bun, who is actually the bunny behind the mascot there. So in any case, welcome to my space. And today we're going to talk about something that has been missing a bit from the conversation about science of reading. And there has been a huge focus on structured literacy phonics, and that is absolutely 100% correct. We have to include really structured phonics, really instruct children in how our phonics code works. This is not at all debatable from what research is telling us. But there are components that are not completely missing, but they've been put to the wayside a little bit. And as I'm watching this unfold, I think, it's time we talk about that. So we're going to talk about something called fluency. And fluency is something that some kids develop naturally. They just have it, but that's just like anything else, right? There are certain skills that certain individuals, they have naturally. It's a gift, it's a talent, it's a strength. And there are some individuals that have to develop that, have to fine tune that. And so we want to really look at fluency and how it affects children long-term in their ability to read and comprehend what they're reading. So right now, we've talked a lot in science of reading in the educational world, in the homeschool world, about phonics. And that is the foundation. We have to help our children crack the code of reading. But we also want them to become fluent readers who can not just decode text. That means that they don't just understand how to blend the words, but they can actually analyze what the text is saying. That's the true purpose behind reading. We want to create children that are able to take text, analyze it, and really dig deep into literature and anything that they come into contact with, because that creates an educated person that can continue to learn throughout their life. And that's what we want. They can think for themselves. They have the critical thinking as they read. So this begins with our littles. And it begins in developing skills that build fluency. So we're going to talk about that today and what that looks like. And honestly, it sounds complex, but these are things that you can do that you probably already are doing. And I just want to encourage you to continue with that while giving you some more ideas of ways that you can really nurture that, so that down the line, you have children that are confident and that are completely literate in the complete sense of the word literate. Right now, we focus on decoding words, which is important, but my concern is that if we focus too much on that and we leave out the skills that help children to really be able to analyze text, that we are going to create children that are functionally illiterate. They are functional in that they can decode words, but illiterate in the sense that they may not be able to interpret text for themselves the way that we want to create in our children. And so, which brings me to a really neat piece of research that children who enter into kindergarten and the ability to rhyme, the ability to recite, about 7 nursery rhymes. These children long term, they outpace their peers all the way into like 3rd, 4th grade. And that really has to do with what the skill of rhyming and reciting the text, what it's building. And that is building something we call fluency. We want our children to continue to be heading towards complete literacy as they reach 3rd, 4th grade. And that goes beyond just being able to blend words. And it actually has to do a lot with skills that we naturally should be including with our children, including things like rhyming games, wordplay, something under the heading of phonemic awareness. And before I dive into the first strategy, and really some of the mechanics of fluency, I want to encourage you to subscribe. If you are getting some great information, like this video so that the YouTube world knows to share this with more individuals, because my goal is to get this information out to families and to help people on their journey with their children. I'm a homeschool mom now. I'm about to graduate a high school senior, homeschooled senior. And so I'm at that stage in my journey, and I have such a love and a passion for what we've been able to achieve in our homeschool. And I want to pass those blessings on to other families. So please share this with others, like, subscribe, and come back for more, because I'm always thinking about what are the things that my community can benefit from, what information is out there that they need. So moving on, so I want to talk about the mechanics of what fluency is, because when we are talking about fluency, we naturally think, okay, well that's just being able to read fast. And that is actually a bit of a misconception about fluency. So when we look at fluency, we're not just talking about how fast a child can read. We are talking about their accuracy. How many words can they read accurately in a minute? And of course, there were stats, and we're going to dive into that a little bit in a minute. But those stats were used to give a range of what would be the average. So of course that can differ. There's definitely that range of development. So I always am mindful of that. It's definitely not to pinpoint or cubbyhole children and where they should be, but just a range so we get an idea of what we're talking about. So the first thing is accuracy. I have this little theme chart here, this anchor chart. And so we have our accuracy, which just talks about, like I said, how many words can a child read accurately in a minute. And this actually includes when they self-correct. So if they make a mistake, that actually is okay as long as they go back and they fix it. Maybe they realize as they read, oh, that didn't make sense. So they go back and they read it again and they self-correct. We actually would then give them an SC, which would stand for self-correct, and they would get that word counted towards their accuracy rate, because we're looking for children who don't read perfectly. We're looking for children that can be functional readers. And functional readers, they don't read perfectly. We make mistakes when we read. We just go back and correct it so that we're understanding the text. And that is really the big difference between a strong reader and a not so strong reader. A strong reader will recognize when something doesn't make sense. They're going to go back and fix it. And a not so strong reader is just going to power through, and they're basically like mission accomplished or mission not accomplished. That is one of the differences between a strong and a not so strong reader. And these skills can be built in children, so never fear. All right, so we also have the speed. So we talked about accuracy. We also have the speed. So yes, speed does play an aspect it's a component of fluency. But with speed, it's not a competition. It's not a race. I used to tell my littles when I would have them do a running record, which is just how we assess their reading out loud. And I would tell them it's not a race. Just read like you would just talk to me. And that's really the basis of it. That's how we want them to read. We want them to read like they would be having a normal conversation. That's the pace at which we want to see children read. And there is a chart. There's a couple different standardized forms. So in this case, we have a fluency chart that talks about the range based on average stats, national statistics. This is a standardized version, but it does give us a perspective on what we're looking at. So you can see, like in the first grade range, the word count per minute, that's the WCPM. We do not establish one for fall. We are working on their fluency. We're going to talk about ways to do that. In winter, they now are looking at wanting 23 words per minute. I think that's a bit on the low range. There's also another scale called the Rosinsky, I can talk today, Rosinsky range. Somebody needs to work on the pronunciation right here. So there are different ideas about that. This is a little on the low side, but that's okay. 23 words per minute for winter, and that would be that would fall in the February range, like right about now. And then in spring, we would look for about 53 words per minute. When I taught first grade, I think we were looking for about 90. So this is definitely different than what I experienced when I was in the classroom. So it's just an example of one range out there. But I think more important than how many words they're reading in a minute, as long as they're not reading robotically or really having to stammer it out, I think more importantly is the next thing we're getting to, and that is their expression, prosody, and their ability to use a level of volume, intonation. We like to see phrasing in words, which, by the way, that is actually the connection between why nursery rhymes and rhyming is so important to long-term fluency and reading success, because think about it. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder where you are. You are phrasing those words together, even though it rhymes and there's a bit of a cantor to it, but it's really teaching children and giving them that experience with language, and that carries all the way up into their reading late elementary, early middle school, and then of course builds the foundation for further success. So that's why nursery rhymes are important, and that's why I advocate not to take rhyming out of our curriculum. Even though phonics are super important, there is a great benefit to that wordplay. There's a reason why it's been a part of childhood since forever. So in all cultures, it's really common. Children have their playground games, their chants, their rhymes, and that's actually part of children's development. It's like kittens that are doing their play fighting. They're learning how to interact, right? And they're learning how to interact with language. That can't be taken away. So now we're talking about our expression. And there's several ways to work on that too, and I'm going to share them with you. All right, so how can you help your child have these benefits? How can you build fluency in your child? Maybe you're a parent who has a child who is, on the younger side, beginning their reading journey or pre-reading. Maybe you're a parent who has a child who's reading and they're just kind of robotic in their reading, and you want to know how to help them with that. So these strategies are great for basically from beginning to end, okay? So the first thing that we want to remember is something I've already touched on, is that nursery rhymes are absolutely fluency gold, okay? They're fun, so what's not to love? But they also do so much good for our kids, all right? So let's include them. Now, read nursery rhymes. Reading nursery rhymes and wordplay, really including that in your day-to-day setting, whether you are a classroom teacher, whether you are a homeschool mom or a mom of a little pre-school age. That is so great for your kids. And remember, they don't care if you have a fancy voice. They love you and they just want to interact with you. All right. So the next thing, they are books that are repetitive. We want to include books that have repetitive language in them because that builds actually that phrasing that we talked about where words are grouped together, but it also builds confidence, it builds expression, and I'm going to touch on this in my next point, but sometimes as parents, we get a little tired of hearing these stories, or like, oh my goodness, brown bear, for the millionth time. But that is fluency gold. And so I really encourage you to include those in your child's library at home, or to check them out from your library, and to include them in your curriculum, whether you're at homeschool, in the classroom. These are fluency gold. They build confidence in our children, and they build expression and help them to understand how language works. So we want to include those. All right, my next point is to reread those stories. And that gets into what I was just talking about, that story that your child just gravitates to and they want to hear it for the millionth time. Read it to them. And if they want to go back and reread that book and you're like, but you already read that like 15 times, it's great for them because they are actually building fluency. It's not about memorizing language. Again, we really are moving away from that in our instruction, which is exactly as it should be. We don't want to encourage too much memorization. 90% of children, as I've said, they need that phonics instruction. But when a child is so comfortable with the text that it's almost by heart, you know, even the book that child who's not even actually reading and they sit down and they can just recite, that's actually building a lot of skills. We're not looking for memorization. No, they're not actually reading, but they are building something called fluency, expression, and something else that I'll talk about in another video. But they are building something called concepts about print, which is critical. That means they know which way to read, where to go when they get to the end of the line, how to turn a page, all those things that children who haven't been exposed to literature at home or in a classroom setting, they don't know that, all right? So there's benefits to books that you reread over and over again, and I know they can drive us you know, just kind of silly bananas. But they are really, really great for kids' literacy development, even long term. So keep up with the rereading of books and encourage your child to do the same. My next point is reader's theater. And we think of this as being like each child gets a script and there's like 10 kids or, you know, a classroom of kids. It doesn't have to be that. As a parent, you are another person. It can be you and your child reading the parts, or they can develop the script. There's so much that can be done that will make it very motivating for your child. When we were younger, not me, well, I was also younger, but my kids, they're now, as I've said, older teenagers, but we had a little kind of theater set up, and they had these little puppets, and they acted out one of those repetitive books. I think it was Brown Bear. It's been a while, and I want to go back and find that footage, but it's probably deep down in my phone record somewhere.
What did you see? I saw a black cat looking at me.
Yay, black cat!
I went walking.
But anyway, Reader's Theater is a great way to build fluency because it's very motivating. It's a bit different, so it's, you know, can be up and maybe moving about. So it has that bit of novelty to it. And it also is encouraging expression. So we want to do that. And also there's one more aspect that connects to something I said previously, is that if you do Reader's Theater, you might be reading it more than once. And we're not looking for memorization, but we are looking for building confidence in phrasing, and that starts to build a foundation for fluent readers. All right, and my next idea is something called shared reading. This is something that's very commonly done in a classroom setting. At one point, it was very connected with balanced literacy, which we have moved away from. However, it still has a place in a curriculum or setting that relies on science of reading. And shared reading is when we might take turns reading, or we might even chorally read together. And that can build confidence in children too, if done correctly. There are some nuances to that, but I encourage you to look into shared reading with your child, especially if they're struggling with their reading. That might be something that will take a bit of the pressure off. And my last one is really, it's more for intervention. If you have a child that's really struggling with a fluency and accuracy in their reading, you might do something called a neurological impress. And I actually modeled this in a short. I'm gonna link it here. And if you're seeing this on Instagram, I will link it in my story. But you really have to understand how that works. It sounds really, really fancy, but it's not. It's so simple. Basically, it is you and the child sitting next to each other. You read the sentence pointing to each word 3 times with expression, and then they have a turn to mimic the intonation of your voice. Now remember, they're building fluency. So it's not about memorizing words. That's not what we're trying to attain here. It's working on that component of expression and word speed, being not too fast, not too slow, how that sounds. Because if you are a child who has struggled to decode words and you're finally getting to that other side where you're now decoding a bit better, you don't have too much experience with how reading sounds in your head or out loud. Not unless you've had people reading out loud to you, which is also important, but actually your own personal experience of how that sounds, your own voice sounding fluent when reading or in your head. Because remember, whatever children do when they're younger, how they're reading out loud is how they're reading inside their head eventually. So we want to encourage that. And this is just another way to do that. And again, it is reading a phrase, usually a sentence in a book 3 times, having the child follow along with your finger, and then their turn to mimic it. They're not really reading it, they're practicing the fluency, but they're getting that feeling of what it feels like to look at a text, follow the words, and how that sounds in a fluent way. And so that's a great intervention. And it's just a lot of modeling. So with that, I want to encourage you to remember that this should be paired with a very structured literacy program. I have a lot of great phonics and phonemic awareness activities in my episodes for littles, and I encourage you to check those out. Subscribe, and again, hit the like button if this has been super helpful for you, or even just a little helpful. And I hope you come back and get lots of great information, because that's what I'm about. All right, and I'll see you next time when I teach to your super learning strengths, one child and family at a time.